and we do commit all this time to you in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, so I'd like to, I'm not going to introduce our speaker. I'm going to let him introduce himself, just to say that this is our third Zoom talk related to the subject of Poland or Jewish history in Europe before and after the war. We did a talk in May or April on the Big Lie. This was the myth that the Jews of Germany somehow stabbed Germany in the back during the First World War and caused Germany to lose that war. Then we did a talk on Vienna. And now this is our third talk, and we have a guest speaker. And I've given him an incredibly big, wide assignment, but I have no doubt that he will tackle it well. So, Philip, maybe you introduce yourself to folks, okay?
I will. I'll introduce myself actually within the body of my little 12-page, I'm afraid, lecture. Some of the personals come out there. So, but I want to begin with Norman Davies. I think many of us who've followed Polish history know something about his masterpiece, God's Playground, a 2-volume history of Poland. Norman Davies was somewhere in Southern Europe in 1980, just right after having completed the manuscript for God's Playground. That name rings, mind you, and is kind of the theme, I suppose, of much of my comments today and of your upcoming visit. But he just finished the manuscript for God's Playground in Greece, or maybe it was Turkey, somewhere in the south. And he caught a glimpse on the television in a restaurant of a strike going on somewhere, news program covering a strike. And he didn't give it any attention. Strikes are seldom riveting. But when suddenly all the strikers knelt, all of them, a crowd of these strikers knelt in prayer, he realized, oh, yeah, we're looking at Poles here. Such was the birth of solidarity in Gdańsk. Anecdotes aside, it's altogether valid to claim that Poland, the homeland of Pope, now Saint John Paul II, is one of the most Catholic countries in the world. 90%, these are the latest statistics, of Poles are Roman Catholics, although a quarter century ago, 95% were Catholics. Moreover, according to the most recent studies, an astounding 30% of Poles attend Holy Mass at least once per week. I'm unaware of any comparable level of religiosity in the Christian world. In the US, according to Pew's most recent massive religious landscape survey, 33% of Americans attend a worship service of some kind once a month, right? Let me repeat, 30% of Poles do so once per week. So still very, very high levels of religiosity. I've lived in Poland for 35 years. I came here in 1990 at that hybrid moment when the communist general who had introduced martial law 1981 crushed the solidarity movement. When I came here, that general, Wojciech Jaruzelski, was the president in this hybrid system, and a Catholic lay leader, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, was the prime minister, and in fact, in the Polish system then as well, the real executive force. I was raised a Presbyterian in the Pacific Northwest, and I was conditioned by parents and friends and neighbors, along with the broader culture, to respect other religions. I think that generally, at least back in my day, was kind of a given. This kind of respect first involved the Catholic Church, or I should say the Catholic school right across the street from where I lived in Portland, Oregon. After school, I used to go there and was part of a basketball team under the warm eye of a Father Eugene, and that certainly was a happy first experience at close quarters with Catholics. Later, once in college in Idaho, that's where I spent most of my growing up. I had the chance to explore that yawning gap that many of us Protestants feel. Little of the narrative learned at Sunday school, after all, in fact, concerns Christianity's 2,000-year history. What many of us do is what many of us pick up is that there was Jesus in the Apostolic Church, and then, well, we skip to the good part and take things up with the Reformation, and in my case with Calvin more than Luther or others. So yes, at college then, that was when I focused on early and medieval church history, on Latin and Greek. That and other factors set me up pretty well to follow and observe Catholicism once having arrived here in Poland. Yeah, I was almost 27 when I came here in 1990, now 62. So most of my life then is here in Poland. Of course, it's been a moving picture, and dramatically so since the very get-go in 1989, 1990, when communism ended. Poland at once began boldly carrying out deep and endlessly complex transformations, both internally and as regards relations with the rest of the world. The desperately poor and isolated post-communist country I came to early in 1990 is now really the model of systemic political and economic transformation, not only in Central and Eastern Europe for that matter. It's a model throughout much of the world. Since 2004, Poland has been a member of the European Union, pretty prestigious club and not easy to get into. 5 years earlier, of course, in 1999, Poland joined NATO and is, in fact, now the outstanding European member of NATO. Poland spends the 5% that the Donald has been demanding, after all. Indeed, Poland swiftly became a regional power and was often trumpeted as an exporter of stability and security. This, in particular, reference to the Baltic states, newly liberated from the Soviet Union, Ukraine, and Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. Today, this is still true, although it regards what we know as the Three Seas Initiative. This is an initiative, in fact, made by Poland together with Croatia to build a kind of confederation, as it were, within the European Union, but embracing all of these countries from the Baltics to the Balkans, and not only European Union members, as it's also open to Ukraine. And it operates under Polish leadership. Throughout this period of post-communist transformation and rising prominence in the region, I've been a very earnest observer of Catholicism's role. Yet the scope of Catholicism here is really so immense as to be impossible to convey. Just to consider describing Catholicism in Poland, I'm struck by an enormous, array of images and associations. And in fact, I think that's the best way to begin, is by sharing certain frescoes about Poland's dominant faith. Their youth, the youth of the priests and nuns here, seen everywhere, every day. The clergymen here, the sisters, are a full generation, on average, younger than their counterparts just right across the river in Germany. Broadcasts of the evening news until 2005, when the Pope died, none of which ever passed without at least a single mention of what the Pope was up to. These broadcasts always were sure to include him addressing his fellow countrymen as well, whether it Peter Square or elsewhere, in their shared, private, one wants to say, language, Polish. The celebration here, not of birthdays, but of imieniny, or name days, taken from the Catholic calendar of saints' holidays. After all, unlike in the Anglo-Saxon world, essentially every Catholic in this country takes his middle name at the age of 8 or 9 from a Catholic saint. And of course, these name days are always involved with a rousing chorus of Stolat, right? That's how uh, it sounds something like the birthday song, Stolat, meaning 100 years. Families, the next fresco. Families on the Saturday before Easter Sunday, strolling together to their parish churches, carrying a small wicker basket in which they've carefully placed a piece of bread, a piece of boiled egg, not a whole one, mind you, but just a piece of meat, and a few grains of salt. These świeconki, as they're called in Polish, will be blessed by the priest and then taken back home and placed on the Easter table. On Easter morning, the family will share them before breakfast. So, compelling rite practiced all across the country. Other snapshots or frescoes include Good Friday, 1990, my first Easter in Poland. It was at the Church of St. James in Warsaw. And following the service, the parishioners all made for the rear exit of the church in order to usher past a tomb scene of the body of Christ lying on a Polish flag. At the time, that seemed like a kind of heresy to me, but it's so normal, the mixing of Polish and Catholic biblical elements, that it no longer strikes me. But then I didn't quite know what to think. The magnetic Sister Mariola, who long hosted the Saturday morning children's Bible show called Żarno, which means the seed. I watched this for years with my little children. There's also my colleague Zosia at the university, who was, like so many of the Polish you meet, a very active Catholic at the same time. And the fresco here is of her passing by my desk in the room we shared, dropping off little clippings from the Catholic press she'd saved for me. The great good fortune of being trapped at Jasna Góra, which means shining mountain, south of Warsaw. That's where, in the Pauline Monastery, Poland's most holy relic, the Black Madonna, is safeguarded. My wife Gosia, a Polish Catholic, had wanted to go there during her first pregnancy, but somehow our private plans coincided with those of uncounted others, and we soon found ourselves pushed forward, right up into the area below the famous icon. So it was a time of, inescapable meditation, and Gosia got the blessing she'd wanted. To remove Catholicism and or Catholic tradition from Polish life would be an act of evisceration. So very much of what is vital in Polishness is tied up with Catholic practice and belief. What seems perhaps most precious and unique in that viscera for me is the sharing the wafer ceremony. It's a ceremony as beautiful as any I know, and I suspect several of us here do know that. But it takes place on Christmas Eve, or in the days leading up to Christmas Eve, if at the office or at the school. It's something practiced not only by families then and at church, but also in the workplace and between classmates at school. But what happens is that each person is holding a thin white wafer, right, of unleavened bread, no less. So the religious symbolism here is explicit. Everyone then circulates about, and two persons approach each other, each extending to the other the wafer. Well, the other person breaks off a piece of that wafer and eats that, while the other person breaks off yours then and eats that, all the while making these warm and flowing wishes to each other. They follow the ritual of health, happiness, prosperity. But that simply bespeaks the fact that they're a deep tradition. And there's lots of twists of personal invention as well that in my experience, always keep these wishes from feeling rote or forced. Another image that must necessarily be conjured up here to begin to grasp Poland's walk with Catholicism is that of the tremendous love millions here had for John Paul II. Their own Karol Wojtyła from the southern highland town of Wadowice. It seems to me clear that we Americans, at least, and I don't know that we all are, it seems several are from Britain and Israel and elsewhere, but we Americans, at the very least, never really experienced such a figure in our own national life. If there is any, albeit dim, resemblance to this or that member of the American pantheon, then it's rather a veneration that came in death. You know, Jefferson or someone, right? Although I guess he's no longer quite so high in the pantheon. The matter with the Pope, then, Pope John Paul II, was utterly different. Indeed, it would be hard to overstate the meaning he had for Poles. He is at once a beloved king, a moral exemplar, and a champion of their cause. One might add that Poles, one necessarily should add that Poles possess a certain mental habit of viewing the Pope as the fulfillment of prophecy, prophecy found in their 19th century Romantic literature. You know, their Shakespeare's, so to speak, their Goethes were 19th century Romantic writers. And this is the most treasured genre in Poland. And it was Juliusz Słowacki who vies for that Shakespeare role with Adam Mickiewicz, whose words give pause, in fact, you know, where he foretells, and I quote here, the coming of the Slavic Pope, the people's friend. More importantly, that link puts a graceful shape to the curve along which Polish minds span backwards over their spiritual heritage. I mean, it's not a covenant of theirs, but they do, like so many other nations as well, see their trajectory punctuated by a divine presence. There are many examples of that in the way Poles feel their identity. If only to mention how it was none other than on the 15th of August, which is the day of the Most Holy Virgin in this land with such a powerful Marian cult, that at the very gates of Warsaw on the 15th of August, Polish armies in 1920 miraculously, as we say here, managed to stop the Bolsheviks on their march to Bavaria and into Western Europe. It was not a victory anybody foresaw, but there you have it. Although Pope John II met with adulation everywhere he went, it was one of the things I feel lucky about. That several times I saw the rapture and the euphoria that engulfed the whole country when he visited his homeland. One example, only one, of Poland's special magic. Christianity in Poland goes back over a millennium. In fact, in 2016, we celebrated the 1050th anniversary of Mieszko I's baptism into Catholicism. This took place, this baptism, on a small island in Lake Lednica near Gniezno. Even in Poland, general histories of that century, the 10th century, and the early years of the next portray Latin Christianity's spread as inevitable, inertial, as taking place under the centrifugal pressure of pan-European developments. This, of course, flattens time and ignores the fact that it took 600 years, essentially, after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire before Christianity, in fact, spread to the north of Europe and into Scandinavia. In fact, though, on closer view, and this is where my scholarly work comes in, the reason for the conversion of any pagan people's court in Europe, the reasons were idiosyncratic. In the case of the conversion of Mieszko I, Poland's erstwhile pagan king, the decision truly appears to have been an act of faith. That is, in my work, I've shown that political reasons, economic reasons, they all are silly to assert. That what you're left to suppose is that as occurred essentially everywhere else in Western Europe. Mieszko, as a superstitious pagan, arrived at the conclusion that the Christian God was more powerful than his Slavic gods, Perun and Sviatovid and Svarozhets and all of these, and believed that the Christian God would make him more powerful. This, after all, is the promise that was made to everyone, whether it's Clovis or it's Ethelbert in Kent, etc. They were always told, become a Christian and your weapons will become more mighty. You might guess that the idea of Mieszko converting from Slavic paganism to Christianity is venerable in this Christian country. But I repeat, in fact, it was me who argued that case and managed to get it accepted, not only in Catholic circles. I mean, they loved it, right? But also in academic writing, that recognition was finally made. And after all, it's a standard sort of a view in English language, German language, and French language scholarship, that these people, these rulers, were motivated by what's called empirical religiosity. That there were, it was kind of a prosperity gospel, you may call it that. They believed that there'd be these material benefits from having the more powerful God. But yeah, my work was first published in the late 90s. My book came out in 2005, and then in 2016, for this 1050th anniversary of the baptism I've mentioned, the National Center for Culture, together with the Polish Episcopacy, produced a documentary film about my work. So yes, this interpretation has become predominant in Poland. As I mentioned, there's more to this story about Mieszko and his baptism. Mieszko was baptized on an island, Lednica Holm. Holm being that old word in English that means a river island or an island in a lake, right? Stockholm has that same word. But yeah, the island then is called Lednica Holm. And it's in a lake between Poznan in western Poland and the nearby city of Gniezno. Poland's first capital, mind you, and it's still the seat of the Polish primate. They're in western Poland. Moreover, not only is that island still there today, but so are the impressive ruins of the very baptistry where, which is so significant for Polish history, a must-see. All the more so is that it was built in Romanesque style. And often when, we're traveling around Europe, we're told, oh yeah, Romanesque church, but you really don't see much that's Romanesque anymore because over the centuries, it's been built over with Gothic and whatever else to today. But these ruins of this bishopric, in fact, with its baptistry, fell into ruins around the year 1000 and were never rebuilt. So what you're seeing is the authentic Romanesque construction there. Here too, I have to include a little bit of personal history. Above all, for the reason that I pray all of you too will develop a personal experience with Polish Catholicism. So in 1997, on the shores of Lake Lednica, a Catholic youth festival was organized by the Dominican friar Jan Gura. This festival became an annual event, and indeed, it's said to be the largest Catholic youth festival in all of Europe, right there at Lake Lednica. So yes, every year from 1997 until his passing then, Father Gura died in 2015, he was summoning Polish youth back to their Christian roots at Lednica. During that first summer, 25,000 young people came and camped on Lednica's shores. Pope John Paul II was then in Poland, in fact, and he flew over in a helicopter and said to them on loudspeaker, I'm quoting the translation, my dear young friends, I embrace each one of you in my heart and extend to you my greetings. You are standing on the shores of Lake Lednica as if at Poland's baptismal beginnings. The personal side of this story is that in 1996, the year before the first event was held, I learned of Father Gura's plans and discovered that he did not know about Mieszko and the island there. Uh, this is not to discredit him, because in fact the baptistry had just been discovered a few years earlier, and the monograph on the discovery was published in 1993. So this information hadn't yet got to him. Uh, the Dominicans had acquired this land on the lakeshore from a donation. It's a funny story in and of itself. There was a lady who had become very rich selling lingerie, and she somehow felt guilty over this and decided to come clean with God by passing 15 hectares or so of this land on the lakeshore to the monastery. But neither she nor the monks knew anything about Mieszko and the baptism. So I contacted him. I gave him an early manuscript of my book, and that he was delighted. This charismatic man is saying far too little. He suddenly saw a deeper meaning in what had looked like, as I've stressed, a coincidence. And one of the main slogans then of the Lednica Youth Festival has been "Choose Christ," just as Mieszko did. So, from 966 AD at Lednica, a place still central to spiritual life here today, Poland has ever belonged to Western Christendom. Of course, Poland's population was never so thoroughly Catholic, nor for that matter was it so ethnically homogenous as since the Shoah and the population transfers that the victorious powers engineered at the conclusion of World War II. For especially from the 1300s onward, Poland included an ever larger Jewish community. At the same time, as a result of expansion eastward via the deepening union with Lithuania, the number of Eastern Rite Christians also was growing markedly. Even so, Roman Catholicism remained the preeminent religion, and reflecting that, in 1386, the Polish court was instrumental in the conversion to Catholicism of Jagiełło, the Grand Duke, as he's called, of Lithuania. He agreed to the terms for marrying the young Queen of Poland, Jadwiga, and that's Saint Jadwiga now since 1997. And to jump way ahead, 80% of Lithuanians to this day are Catholics. The Reformation also had an impact on Poland and did so without resulting in the contagion of religious wars that raged in Europe in the 16th century. Much of that good fortune is due to the sagacity of Poland's king, Zygmunt II August. King Zygmunt, against the grain of the times and its principle of cuius regio, eius religio, whose region, that's his religion, famously declared, "I am not the king of your consciences." Moreover, it was not just the German-speaking residents of Polish cities who became Lutherans, or more often, Calvinists. Much of the Polish gentry at large converted to Reformed confessions. Indeed, from 1549 to 1564, Poland's parliament, which is called the Sejm to this day, was dominated by a Protestant majority. The so-called father of Polish literature from that century, Mikołaj Rej, who was a member of that parliament, was himself part of the Protestant majority. But despite the efforts of Poland's most prominent reformer, and that's Jan Waski, who's sometimes in English referred to as John Olasko, he's known from his work in Germany and England as well. Despite his efforts, Jan Waski's, the many Protestant denominations were unsuccessful in establishing a common platform. The Counter-Reformation in Poland was swift, therefore, in reabsorbing the Protestants. Here, another example of how many Poles see a certain divine guiding hand in their history. The symbolic end of the gentry's attachment to Protestantism came in 1608 in the Lithuanian town of Szydłów, which today is called Szydłowo. But yeah, there was a Calvinist seminary of all things, right there in Szydłowo, and who appeared to them one day in 1608? Mother Mary, and she caused several professors of this Calvinist seminary to convert, along with a large number of Calvinist lay people who also saw her apparition. This is, by the way, the very first appearance of the Madonna in Europe, is officially recognized by the Vatican. You can't make this up. Returning to the flow of history, the very fact of Catholicism's existence in Poland is nonetheless no mean achievement. Nearly 3,000 Polish priests, nuns, and monks were murdered during the Nazi occupation of Poland. Nor was life under Stalin designed to be conducive to religious believers of any type. Here again, I wish to resort to some frescoes to convey certain contours and accents of Catholicism during the communist period. Over the course of the first year of the war, 1946, an iron curtain descending across the continent, over 4 million Poles, in a population of 24 million then, made pilgrimages to Jasna Góra, the monastery I've mentioned, safeguarding that most precious icon here, the Black Madonna. 4 million of 24 million. Even during Stalin's life, Catholicism in Poland was nonetheless cultivated by the masses, the clergy, by lay intellectuals and their publications. And they were shepherded by the indomitable Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski. He's called the Cardinal of the Millennium, as in the greatest of the second millennium. Though the youngest member of the Polish episcopacy, he was nominated Poland's primate in 1948. Wyszynski's strategy vis-a-vis the communists for the survival of Catholicism was to stake the church's future on folk, mass participatory religion. And that emphasis goes far to explain its continuing power today in Poland. In testimony to the depravity of Polish communists, the worst of Stalinism, in fact, fell after Stalin's death in Poland. This was the period of 1953-1956. Cardinal Wyszynski was only then, imprisoned. The publication of Catholic newspapers and magazines were suspended. But following what we call the thaw in 1956, October 1956, Catholic life was allowed to resume. Cardinal Wyszynski was released. Catholic newspapers and magazines resumed publication. A strictly limited number of Catholic representatives were elected to the Sejm, where they formed their own parliamentary club. This provided one of several platforms for them in those years to advance their brand of Catholicism. Of course, the Second Vatican Council also deepened Catholic life and worship in Poland. The first great fruits of the church's reform in Poland were seen when in 1965, immediately after the council had concluded its work, when Polish bishops addressed the bishops of Germany in their famous letter with the still ringing words, "We forgive and ask to be forgiven." Wow. This is victim to culprit here. Later came October of 1978, when Cardinal Wojtyła became Pope John Paul II and beseeched all of his listeners, perhaps none more earnestly listening than those to the north in Poland, "Fear not." Less than a year thereafter, he was here in Poland in June 1979. And I recommend all of you to have a glance on YouTube of his homily. It's somewhat lengthy, but it's worth skipping, if only to the final part. The Pope had studied theater, and that had been one of his main focuses as a young priest. And all of that skill and talent he learned in theater came to the fore in this speech. It's just riveting and gives shivers to Poles today. They often, in this country, uh, all these years after his death still, they often quote the final words of his speech. And unfortunately, the Vatican itself offers a very, very poor translation of that speech. And but what he really says in the end, after having sketched the whole trajectory of Polish history, showing how Christ uh, is at the center of its unfolding, he then cries out, "Let thy spirit descend." Raises his tone, "Let thy spirit descend." And then gritting his teeth, he says, "And make anew the face of earth here on earth." Um, and you'll hear that mentioned abundantly to this day. And of course, was it a coincidence that solidarity broke out within the next months only? Right? I mean, it was so much related, the birth of solidarity, to the newfound courage that the Pope offered them. That there's a whole other order than the communist order that they can work within. What's become of the Catholic Church in post-communist Poland? Well, that's a huge story. But the first point is that the Catholic Church is not monolithic in the Third Republic. That's what we call modern Poland. Because Polish society itself is so diverse, the church reflects all the various different demographics, but without a monolithic sort of presence. Though the equation Pole equals Catholic, a Pole is a Catholic, is not exact. It's so nearly so that you might quip to its critics that they doth protest too much. Poland's second largest church is that of Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox believers. And they have like the Lutherans, in fact, they have a territorial profile. They're not spread evenly throughout the country. So it's a circumstance much different than in the U.S., where the mix is pretty homogenous, right? I mean, in the places where I live, there were always an abundance of people from various professions. Not here in Poland. These Eastern Orthodox are focused, of course, concentrated on the eastern border of Poland. And for that matter, they number only 0.5% of the Polish population. The third largest church after the Eastern Orthodox is, and I suppose this will come as a surprise. Anybody want to guess? What's the third biggest church after the Eastern Orthodox? Anyone? It's the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, and they also number just slightly less than the Eastern Orthodox, 0.5%. The Protestant denominations taken together add up to 0.4%. And the single largest Protestant denomination is that of the Lutherans, who again have like the Orthodox, they have a regional profile. Half of these 80,000 Lutherans in Poland, a country of nearly 40 million, live on the Czech border in an area called Cheshire. So they're also not a universal presence here. Evangelical Christians number variously. The estimates range from 50 to 70,000, so fewer than these Lutherans. Moreover, it should be noted that the Polish ecumenical movement is a real force. For instance, in 1999, the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, the Lutherans, and 5 other Protestant denominations signed an accord declaring the mutual recognition of each other's baptism. So quite a feat. In fact, the unkind, and myself here included, are inclined to believe that the cooperation in various fora of many of the Protestant denominations with the Catholic Church entails a kind of prosthetics or even life support, as in the case of the Presbyterians. That church here is called, in fact, not Presbyterian, it's called Kościół Ewangelicko-Reformowany, so Reformed Evangelical Church. But their numbers are, are claimed to be a couple of thousand now in the country. But when you go to their main church, of only two now that are at all active in the country, just two, I never see more than 20 or 30 people there. So, but yeah, they actively cooperate with the Catholic Church. So there's lots of media events where the Presbyterian pastor stands alongside the Catholic primate or bishop and is otherwise seen in the media for only this reason, really. At any number of points in my remarks, it must have occurred to many of you to retort, well, it may be a mile wide, but I'll bet there too it's only an inch deep. An apt caveat. For in fact, whereas the percentage of Americans who believe in God exceeds the number who maintain a denominational affiliation, in Poland, conversely, although over 90% are Christians of one type or another, 84% of Poles believe in God. So, a fact that serves to indicate the cultural hold of Catholicism, of Christianity, and also the presence of agnosticism. Beyond that, experts often repeat that Catholic experts repeat that 2/3 of Catholic believers are heretics unaware of the fact. This is largely the result of Polish Catholicism's abiblicality, as Catholic critics term it. Indeed, it's often said that Catholics in Poland, excuse me, know Greek and Roman mythology much more intimately than the stories of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. That tends to get ignored as a whole anyway. This notwithstanding the fact, history is taught everywhere at school, a boon that the Catholic Church, flush with victory, won for itself in 1990. There is, in fact, a choice. Elementary children, which runs to 8th grade here, they have an 8-4 system, are given, or at least their parents are given the choice: religion, which is always Catholicism, or ethics. But 78% of Polish parents choose the religion class, not ethics. In 1989, Poland virtually at once threw her doors open to David. How much time have we got? I think you wanted to go to Q&A at about this point.
Soon, I want to go to soon, but I would like you to address in this context Poland's Christianity and its relationship with the Jewish people. Now, I know you're just going to sketch this. You want to ask, how is a country that has such a strong influence, religious influence?
Okay. Then I'll skip the next section I have, which is about the debates on church-state relations here. I'll share just a conclusion. That is that when Poles entered this new world, the Western world in 1990, there were all sorts of worries and fears, and also dreams that they would be able to enter Europe as an example of Christianity's viability, and often in that context, in that debate, which was much louder in the 90s, of course, words of Karol Wojtyła, written during the war, were repeated. And I quote here the translation: "I think that our liberation," and here he was thinking of from Nazi occupation, in fact, "I think that our liberation should be the gate of Christ. I think of an Athenian Poland, but one more perfect than Athens by the immensity of Christianity." Well, I do have a few comments about Polish-Jewish relations, an area of great interest to everyone here, I know, and one David especially has great knowledge and insights about. So I'll let you rely on David for more. And me, I wish to touch on the topic once again with a few frescoes and then some commentary. That the very first description of the Polish kingdom that came into being with that Mieszko we've talked about, the very first description we historians have, was written in about 965 AD by a Jewish trader. He was in the service of the Caliph in Cordoba and had traveled north and left a very ringing, flattering description of the Polish kingdom, explaining the organization of the state, and that Mieszko himself, a Malik, he was writing in Arabic, but that the Malik Mieszko was the most powerful of all the four Slavic kings. That Poland, as we all know, Polin in Hebrew, here one rests, was often in previous centuries hailed as Paradis Judaeorum, a paradise for the Jews. That from the end of the 16th century, at that very time that King Zygmunt II, August, declared religious toleration throughout the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, from then until the agony of the Commonwealth, in the second half of the 18th century, there existed the Council of the Four Lands, which was kind of like a Jewish parliament, or at least reflected Jewish autonomy over Jewish affairs in the Commonwealth. Nothing like this existed in Europe, though comparisons with the Millet system in the Ottoman Empire come to mind. Sadly, tragically, this largely peaceful coexistence collapsed in the latter half of the 19th century. The reasons, of course, concerned the European-wide phenomenon of nationalism, of organizing states around homogeneous ethnic groups. And more locally, however, the tensions arose from the sudden influx of huge numbers of Jews into Poland and Lithuanian towns and cities. Many of us know that this or that city in Poland was once 1/3 Jewish or half Jewish across the whole sweep of lands just north of Warsaw. But that had not been the case before the last decades of the 19th century. Horribly, during that time of animosity, the pogroms that were regularly breaking out most often did so when on Christian holidays, at Christmas, at Easter, and not only here in Poland, but throughout the whole Pale of Settlement and in Romania. The worst such pogrom in Warsaw took place right after Christmas services in 1881. And the parishioners ran out and attacked the Jewish district, the Jewish business district. There were lots of beatings and several deaths as well. Easter was the other typical day when pogroms were launched. With little time left for your remarks and questions, let me jump to matters today. Officially, the Polish authorities have supported Israel during the ongoing wars. Nothing at all of what we've seen in Spain or Ireland has occurred here. And yet, public opinion does clearly have a dim opinion of Israel at war. Though even here, in the press and in the public at large, that disapproval of Israel is largely muted. Again, to make a comparison, there's been precious little of the pro-Palestinian, let alone pro-Hamas marches that have taken place in France and England and elsewhere. Really none of that here. One of the, I think it was in November, just a month after Hamas's attack, there was a picture of a woman marching in Warsaw with an anti-Semitic poster. I won't describe it in detail, but as it turns out, much to the happiness of Poles, this was a Norwegian student on exchange at the medical academy here. But within this muted disapproval of Israel, which any of you coming here will encounter, there's a cancer that's growing. I'm thinking here not so much of the outrageous shenanigans of the EU MP, Grzegorz Braun. This is the guy who last December took a fire extinguisher in the Polish Sejm to the Hanukkah candles that are traditionally lit there in the parliament. This is a guy who claims there are secret Israeli bunkers hidden away in Poland, waiting to receive Israeli leaders when they escape nuclear attack from Iran. Rather than these shenanigans, I'm thinking about the 6% of Polish voters who cast their ballot for this guy just this May, 2 months ago, in the presidential elections. That's over 1 million Poles. 2 days ago at Jedwabne, And I think we all know that little town in northeastern Poland. This is where, in the book called Neighbors by Jan Gross, the local Poles marched over 300 Jews into a wooden barn, locked them up in there, and burned them all to death. There are official ceremonies that happen annually at Jedwabne, and 2 days ago was that annual commemoration, and there was this EU with all of his immunity, EU MP Brown. He disrupted those events. I've seen this covered in the Israeli press, so maybe many of you have as well. And then he went on national radio and explained that Jewish ritual murders, the whole blood libel, were real, and that the gas chambers of Auschwitz were fake news. Luckily, the radio journalist at this point cut off the interview, and that was the end of it. But there you have it. Various Catholic leaders, lay and clergy alike, have of course denounced Brown. And I understand that Catholic intellectual leaders will soon issue a statement to society, much as they did in January after the whole fire extinguisher scandal. Let me close then with some fragments from that January declaration made by Catholic lay leaders against Grzegorz Braun and those who support him. I think it gives special insight not only into the hopes and fears of Catholics regarding relations with Jews, but also into the heart of their understanding of the Polish state's Catholic essence. So please pay attention to what they're saying about their state's identity. It begins thus, and I'll give you just a paraphrased, shortened version. In view of the increasingly frequent attempts to sow animosity in Christian-Jewish relations, we feel obliged to call to mind a few basic religious and historical facts. Christ the Lord celebrated the feast of Hanukkah, see John 10, 22 to 23, as every Catholic should know. The Church reminds us of this in the Gospel reading for the Wednesday after Passion Sunday in the Missal of Pius V, and on Tuesday of the fourth week of the Easter season in the Mass Lectionary of Paul VI. 2. We Catholics do not celebrate this feast, as our Feast of Light is primarily the Feast of Candlemas, honoring the Redeemer's first appearance in the temple. This does not change the fact that the Jews' celebration of the dedication of the temple deserves respect, all the more so as the Church has always believed that the Jews, in practicing their religion, remain witnesses to the truth of Christianity, to the truth of the messianic promises that Christ fulfilled, and to the acts in the history of salvation that preceded the Nativity. I'll skip point 3 to begin with 4. The gestures of kindness shown today to the small Jewish community in Poland are also an expression of reverence for our shared centuries-long history, so brutally interrupted by Nazi Germany. Signs of respect for Jewish culture are therefore a way to mend, as it were, this tragic rupture caused by Poland's loss of independence and the German occupation. Indeed, even before the war, Cardinal August Hlond, primate of Poland, lamented the lack of respect for the indescribable tragedy of the Jewish nation. This lament should be all the more clear to us today. The Christian character of the Polish state abides foremost in the publicly expressed reverence for God and for the faith of the Church, as well as in the pursuit of the common good that encompasses, in its proper manner, every social group and person that comprises the community of our republic. The religious tension between Christianity and Judaism, the tensions between Poland and Israel concerning our history, the defense of reverence for Poland and Polish people battling the occupiers under German rule, all of this requires a well-grounded presentation of the Christian and Polish case. Thus, aggressive acts, hostility, and the fomenting of prejudice dramatically impede that case. A little bit more to their declaration, but I'll leave it at that and pass the baton, David, back to you. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank, uh, thank you. And thank you for sharing. I'd like to start by asking you the question. You said that despite its deep Catholic roots, right, that there was an abiblicism in Polish society or within the Catholic Church. And of course, we know the the Gospels are read every Sunday. A lesson from the Old Testament is read every Sunday. But would you like to expound on that, the implications of that? Um,
Well, yeah, I can say a couple of things. First of all, that differently than when you see people heading to church, to a Protestant church carrying Bibles, Polish Catholics never do, right? And nor are Bibles, placed in front of you in the pews, right? So they're not reading together with the pastor, and it's all a very passive sort of arrangement. You're right, though, of course. Yeah, there are these biblical readings, but yeah, the way that the Old Testament is almost totally ignored, or is so unfamiliar is also striking. Um, this regards American Israeli relations. I mean, they here in Poland they tend to miss so many of the cues, right? That, for example, I first wrote about this. I guess it was 2012. It was a time of heightened tensions about the Iranian nuclear program, and Netanyahu went to the U.S. and had a meeting with Obama and handed him a copy of the Book of Esther, right? Well, that was a pretty clear message. We're dealing with Haman once again here, and a threat of extinction of the people, and yet no one here caught that. And mind you, I was searching all the various Polish news sources and so forth, and yeah, it also regards the way that more broadly that Poles tend to think that the American Israeli relationship is all built around APAC, and if not APAC strictly, then around the Jewish diaspora. They have essentially little clue. I mean, I've been hammering the point now for several years, mind you, but they've had essentially no inkling that in fact the mainstay is no less than Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's heir apparent, has stressed that the mainstay, the most important pillar of U.S. support for Israel is that of the evangelical Christians, right? And it's been really hard to try and make that point clear.
mhm.
Again, lacking a sort of biblicality.
Okay. And one more, I'll just ask one more question, and then we'll open it up. John Paul II and the way that he changed Jewish-Christian relations. I heard from the mouth of the chief rabbi of Poland, Michael Schudrick, to
He
say,
still is, yeah.
yes, he still is, that John Paul did more to improve Jewish-Christian relations than any other single individual in the last 1800 years. Your thoughts about that or comments on perhaps generally and what he did and how he did it?
Well, I wouldn't add much to that. I mean, he is famous for the phrase "our elder brother," which had existed previously, of course, but he used to repeat that quite a lot, and it caused some controversy here, referring to Jews as elder brothers. I recall, of course, that was it the mid 90s? I don't think it was the 80s, but he was the first pope in history. It's 2,000 years now, after all, the first one to enter a Jewish synagogue. He did so in Rome. He otherwise expressed a lot of warmth. He maintained close friendships with Jews he grew up with in Wadowice. They were often seen visiting him in Rome and so forth. So yeah, I'm sure the chief rabbi Schuldrich is right, yeah, in that assessment.
Okay. Um, I need to hold on. I need to unmute folks so that we can ask questions. And hold on a second. Mute all, cancel. Okay, so we're allowing you to unmute yourself as you ask Philip a question. So hold on, wait a minute, just a second. Phil, go ahead.
I think we all need to unmute ourselves again. Looks like everybody's muted.
Yeah, everyone is muted, and you need, when you ask a question, unmute yourself, please. Okay. Let's see.
Next question.
Okay.
Oh, there's got to be some good questions out there. People, come on.
So, Philip, why such a large percentage of Jehovah Witnesses?
Yeah. I wonder that myself, and I don't really have a clue. I mean, it's got to be related to their missionary work. They're very active in that regard. Just a couple days ago, I was out. We've had a drought until about a week ago. Then it started raining, pouring. But yeah, I was out watering the lawn when three Jehovah Witnesses were walking down the street and drew me into conversation. So yeah, I mean they're a regular presence. That by no means was the first time I've been accosted, but yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer.
It is a very kind of simplistic understanding of the Bible and faith, and perhaps it appeals to people from that standpoint, right? The way they answer oftentimes complicated questions and flatten them out. And then they do create a very strong sense of identity in their subculture.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would like to ask one question that I'm sure you'll be able to shed some light on. The impression generally is, and I don't know the background history of Poland as well as I should. I realize that, but the impression is that the Jewish population, which was considerable pre-Second World War,
Mm-hmm.
they obviously had their own towns and villages and so on, but there was basically a positive relationship between them and Polish people at large. Whereas the impression that one gets is that when things started to grow really nasty for the Jewish communities in the Nazi invasion, that Polish people weren't exactly in any way coming to defend them. In fact, they probably turned against them apart as much as anything else. Now, is that true? And if so, was the reason for that simply because of the Nazi attitude to Jews generally?
Well, yeah, Polish-Jewish relations turned very sour and antagonistic far long before the war. This is a
Right.
matter, of the second half of the 19th century.
Okay.
Again, it relates to the whole era of nationalism, right? It was within the thinking of nationalism that all sorts of non-Poles began to be viewed ever more dimly and demonically in the case of the Jews. And this was compounded in a way that reflects events today in the US and all across Europe of mass influxes of immigrants, Jewish refugees, in fact, fleeing, in particular, of course, Tsarist Russia. I mentioned that there were these towns we all know to have been half Jewish, a third Jewish, etc. In the case of Warsaw, but that wasn't the case, say in 1860 or even 1870. There was this mass influx, and because Poland at the time was occupied, there was no Polish state in the 19th century. The school system, particularly in what is Eastern Poland, and which was under the Russians, not under the Austrians or the Germans. Um, uh, The school system, the press, all of it was in Russian language. Polish language was outlawed. So for this reason as well, it wasn't really incumbent upon the Jews to learn Polish language and Polish culture and the rest. So they weren't assimilated like they might otherwise have been. Or even on the outbreak of the war, which was 21 years into the existence of a Polish republic, right? The Russian, of course, occupation had ended during World War I. There was a new Polish state from 1918. So even in 1939, it was only a minority of Poland's Jews who could speak Polish, right?
That's
They had,
really.
yeah, they had their own school systems, and were otherwise. This is something that Władysław Bartoszewski, who was an important Catholic leader during the war. He later became Minister of Foreign Affairs here. He's one of the righteous of the nations. He got that award in the early 60s. He also was a historian who wrote much about Polish-Jewish relations. In his work, he always stresses this, that, as much as Poles may in fact have wanted to help, at least for those Poles who may have wanted to help, it was really impossible because of the fact these people didn't know Polish customs and couldn't fake it. He wrote, Bartoszewski gave examples of trying to teach some of the Jews to cross themselves when they walked past a church. Even today, many Poles still do that. I mean, you'll be in a tram going through Warsaw, and you'll notice that some of the passengers are suddenly crossing themselves because we've passed the Catholic Church. Even teaching gestures like this were really hard, let alone, of course, the fact of circumcision. When the Germans were intent on finding out, well, it was for that reason too, only too easy.
Philip, even those Jews who could speak Polish, most spoke with a Yiddish accent. So there was no hiding. All right. In fact, those Jews that did well and survived were often the very ones who could speak perfect Polish, right? Without that Yiddish accent, right? And I think there's a second thing Ray, to remember. I think it's the only country in Europe where the Germans said, if you help a Jew or hide a Jew, we will not only shoot you, but we will shoot your mother and your father and your sister and your brother and your children and so forth. In places like Holland, France, you might help a Jew. If you're caught, you might go to jail, right? But in Poland, you're going to be executed. So it certainly sobered your mind before you wanted to go and to help somebody.
If I can give an American example, I've got a brother who's been living 25 years now in Georgia, right? He like me, he's from Oregon and Idaho, but moved out there. And one of his first trips out here to Poland, the topic of Jewish relations came up, and how little the Poles were able to help the Jews during the war. And I gave him an example from the South. Who would it be? Who would be the conquering empire of the American South, let's say in the late 19th century? The Canadians? Well, whatever. Let's imagine that some force, takes over the old Confederacy and has a policy of wanting to exterminate all the blacks. Well, relations were pretty poor, right, between white and black Southerners, and how many of those white Southerners could in fact be counted on to extend help? Again, the war broke out at a time of horribly poisoned relations here as well. I mean, there were outright fascist agitators, Polish fascist agitators in Poland. So yeah, it was a horrid mess. How to escape it for a Polish Jew? I mean,
and that hostility wasn't only directed against Jews. There was probably even worse Polish hostility towards Ukrainians, for example.
There was hostility. Was it worse? I don't know that
it was pretty bad, right? Considering what happened in 43 and 44 between Ukrainians.
Yeah. The Polish Republic, this new one, the Second Republic, we call it, from 1918, refused to use the word. It was illegal to use the word Ukraine or Ukrainian or whatever other forms. In the press and so forth, you had to write what sounds like Little Russians, right? Which is also a term that the big Russians used to use about Ukrainians. But yeah, it was denied that that was a people. There were these theories that were very prevalent, even in the Polish intelligentsia, that the Habsburgs, those nasty Austrians, had concocted the identity of Ukrainians, but that it wasn't a real national identity.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you very much.
More other questions? David Butterfield, I see, wants to ask. David?
Hi, Philip.
Hello.
Hi, Philip. Enjoyed your lecture so far. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
A question. What I've heard, there seems to be a growing interest in Jewish heritage and culture. And I was just wondering, is this largely from the Catholic Church perspective, or is it from the common people of Poland's perspective, if you like?
Oh yeah, it's a lot of things. It's at least those two factors. And this gives me a chance to raise the case of Grzegorz Ryś. This is an outstanding Polish clergyman. He's now a cardinal, in fact, for a couple of years, 3 years, I believe now, Cardinal Ryś. And he's also within the episcopacy, he's the head of the chapter that deals with Catholic Jewish relations, and he's obviously a Philo-Semite. He also has tried to nudge Catholic thinking in the direction of Christian Zionism, which is I think we all know it's rather anathema to church leaders, certainly Catholic church leaders, but to lay Catholics as well. Much like with liberal Protestants. But among the broader society, there has been some real interest, and some of it looks kind of like a caricature. I mean, there's this district in Krakow. Maybe some of you have seen Kazimierz. And it used to be the Jewish district in Krakow, and it's been recreated with seemingly Jewish restaurants and theaters and so forth. And it's sometimes laughed off as Jurassic Park, right? To stress that it's all kind of a confabulation of sorts. But yeah, maybe this isn't, in fact, an answer to your question, but about the interest in Jewish things, I keep coming back to Israel because Polish interest in Jews tends to be truncated. It doesn't seem to extend to the Jews as a people. I mean, which is why they tend to be oblivious to Israel. And so many of the people who in this country, and I'm thinking especially of otherwise liberal, tolerant-minded Catholic leaders, lay and clergy, who would otherwise, consider themselves dyed-in-the-wool Philo-Semites, people who go to Jedwabne and cry, and so forth. And these people tend to be rabidly anti-Israeli. And when you raise this, there's a contradiction here, isn't there? No,
Definitely, yes.
They don't. Is that you? Is that you, David? I hear talking. No.
Yes, it was me saying definitely. I concur. Totally, yes.
Yeah, and it's a really startling thing. So,
well, that phenomena is occurring all over the world, where people will say, "We love Jews, we like Jewish history, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, but we have a very serious issue with the state of Israel and its policies, and so on and so forth." And I remember 45 years ago when I first came to Israel, and you talk to Christians coming from overseas, they all loved Israel, and they didn't want to have anything to do with Judaism or Jewish tradition. And today, it's almost totally reversed, or it's reversed in many circles. even conservative circles, where people say, yes, we love Fiddler on the Roof and we love bagels, but we really can't stand Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but this goes back, to other Israeli governments as well. It's not really Netanyahu, who does have such a horrid reputation everywhere. But when Lapid and Bennett took power in Israel, that didn't cause any warming of hearts or any recognition that all of our supposed philo-Semitism and love for these dead Jews. I mean, I think we know the book by Dara Horn from the 4 or 5 years ago. People love dead Jews. Unfortunately, Dara Horn didn't include the example of Poland in her book. I mean, there are examples from China, etc., and from Holland and so forth. The book begins with an example of how a young, what's the word, volunteer working at the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam was forced, a Jewish guy, he was forced to hide his kippah, right? Because they say, no, we want to be neutral. And she raises Dara Horn in this book, the irony of a Jew having to hide himself at the Anne Frank Museum. It took 6 months for the board of directors of the Anne Frank Museum to come to the conclusion that, yeah, there is an irony here. That does clash, and we'll have to let you wear your kippah. But yeah, she left the Polish example out, and sadly.
okay. Other questions? Maybe one or two more. We have it's Sachi, are you with us? My friend Sachi. I don't know. He's logged in. Justine? You can unmute yourself if you have a question. Yeah. Here comes someone.
I'd add that there's a historian of Poland named Butterfield. David, is that you, or is that?
No, I'm sorry, no such claim to fame. I thought.
Yeah,
No.
I think it's an Englishman, and I can't remember his first name, so I
Yes.
wondered if maybe right.
Oh yes, no. I think I was wondering if we had a connection to the Butterfield stage, but I don't think we do. So
Right.
We have, I think Justine is going to ask a question, and she's a student of Holocaust studies at the Haifa University. Nope.
No, but I'll just ask, do you know of Leopold Stocker? He was a Catholic man who helped Jews hide in the sewers. I've got to try and remember whereabouts it was. Do you know about Leopold Stocker?
No, I don't. That doesn't ring.
No. Okay.
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah, these hiding places were, of course, everywhere. I mean, one of the facts that are often raised in this debate, did we Poles help or did we not? Were we collaborators? Were we not? Yeah, one of the facts raised is that nearly 8,000 of the righteous among the nations, which is the largest national contingent, so to say, 8,000 are Poles.
And you have to, and there's a Polish argument, which you have to give some credence to, that it's not just 8,000, that while Yad Vashem may have honored 8,000, surely, in the case, virtually every time a Jew was hidden, there are probably 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 10 other people knew about it and kept their mouth shut, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then, of course, on the other side of the coin, you had Poles who would turn Jews into the Germans, for a few zlotys, right? For a few
Right.
dollars. So I guess you could say, Philip, when the Poles were good, they were very, very good. and when they were bad, they were very, very bad.
Mm.
In all of this. And it is a very nuanced picture. And I think just as a way to end this, that we need to be careful, right, in the way that we judge and assess. So, for example, when our group goes to Poland on our second day, there's a Franciscan convent very close to the central train station there, where they hid lots of Jews. And the leadership of the Catholic Church in Poland in the Second World War may have been poor in its relationship with the Jewish people. But the Catholic Church in Holland or France or in parts of Italy, they were exemplary. So it's hard to say the Catholic Church did this or the Catholic Church did that, right, in the war. It's also hard. We talk about Poland, right? There's some places in Poland regionally where Jews did much better, and other places where, you know, they didn't fare so well, and it had to do with a lot of things that were going on even before the war. So I try to get people to think, with a little more nuance about these things.
If I can add one point to that, yeah, there were so many children who were taken into convents and protected and hidden, and in many cases, I happen to know this is a matter that's been researched quite a lot in just the recent years. In many cases, those children who survived the war and wound up in Israel refused to tell their story of having been saved, but in a convent by nuns. And it was only 2 or 3 years ago that Anita Shapira, who's like the doyen of Zionist historians, I think many of us know her name, Shapira from Tel Aviv, she finally admitted, now a very old woman, bad health, but that's how she survived. She had kept her secret all these years of how she had survived the occupation. It was known only that she was born in the city of Łódź, which has those strange Polish letters. It looks like Lodz, right? But how she survived and managed to make Aliyah in 1947, etc., always kept a secret until just the 3 years ago, when she finally admitted, well, no, she was taken to a convent. Her mother took her there, and that's where she remained to the end of the war.
You see, that's a good example of what happened. There was a failure on the national level of church leadership. The abbots, right, and the mother superiors who ran convents and monasteries, they just took matters into their own hands. They had no direction, right? They just had to follow their conscience, and that was.
They were also conscientious enough to keep records of these Jewish children. I mean, once the war was over, what often happened was that Jewish couples, for whatever reasons, whether or not they had children, went to these convents and asked them, if you've got any Jewish kids, we'll take them, or one, or two. And in fact, yeah, they were keeping records, so it was known. And that's how she left to Israel in 1947. Was that a couple came there and said, we want to have one of your Jewish kids. There was the name, and here you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd just like to remind people, especially those who love doing things at the last minute, we will be in Poland on the 15th. If you'd like to fly there and join us, there's room on the bus. Philip, thank you very much. I hope that if you're in town, you'll be able to come and say hello to our group. And
I'm here to the 18th. We're
okay.
going to Portugal. Yeah.
All right, so that may be the day we leave Warsaw. So thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting lecture.
Thank you, everyone.
A lot for us to think about, and I hope that we'll be able to expand on some of your thoughts in the days to come. Okay.
I wish you all a great trip.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Many blessings. Bye-bye.